Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion about the media's reporting on the war in Gaza. We've had a lot of interest, as you would expect, on this topic, and it's nice to see such a good turnout because, you know, over the last few months, what we've seen on our screens has shocked us all. It's been described as the world's first live-streamed genocide. And what we've witnessed, you know, it's shocked everyone, and it should have shocked the world into action, but all we've seen is the apathy of world leaders towards the suffering of innocent lives, towards the suffering of Palestinians. And most of what we know about what's happening in Gaza comes from the mainstream media and also social media as well, and it's brave journalists who are risking their lives to reveal the true horrors of the conflict. And so the media does have a responsibility to report fairly, to report impartially, and also very crucially to report accurately. But how do you report on a conflict which has become so partisan? What are the challenges in covering a story like this? And how has the media reported on the war in Gaza? These are just some of the questions we'll be exploring in today's panel discussion, and we're very fortunate to have with us distinguished panelists who have first-hand experience of what's it like in Gaza right now. Joining me in person, very glad to have you here, Dr. Khalid Dawas. He's a British surgeon who graduated from the University of Cambridge. He's a senior lecturer at UCL and a surgeon at University College Hospital. He spent a total of 4 weeks serving in Gaza in 2 different stints, and he witnessed firsthand the dire conditions in hospitals there. He's described how hospitals were reduced to practicing medieval medicine and Gaza was made unlivable. And then joining us virtually, we have Yumna El-Sayed. She's an award-winning Al Jazeera journalist. She's Gaza correspondent for Al Jazeera English, where she worked in Gaza for 10 years before evacuating with her family. And she's previously worked for numerous international news agencies, including TRT, Associated Press, and RT as well. And also joining us virtually is Shuruk Assad. She's a journalist and media trainer based in Jerusalem and Ramallah. She has 30 years of journalism experience and was one of the very first female journalists on Palestine TV. She is also the country director of the Women in News program in Palestine. So thank you for joining us. Welcome to the panelists. I'll start with you, Dr. Khalid. You spent 4 weeks in Gaza serving in hospitals during the current conflict. Can you just give us a sense and just describe what the situation there is on the ground right now?
Atif, if I can perhaps just make a comparison between what I saw in December and then in April and what I'm hearing now, as well as an extrapolation of what I saw during those times. And it's not just the visual, it's the auditory, it's olfactory, it's about smells, vision, and what you hear. And my first trip to Gaza through Egypt, as we crossed the border from the Egyptian Rafah side to the Palestinian Rafah side, it was dramatically different. And it sounds very melodramatic, but it's very true. You instantly smell the explosives in the air. And it was a thing that will stick with me forever. And you can see the mushroom clouds in the distance. You can hear the explosions within 5 minutes of arriving in the house that we stayed in just outside of Khan Yunis. On the Mawasi side, which has become part of the news because it's been hit very viciously recently. We stayed in a house there, and within 5 minutes of arriving, there was a massive explosion which rocked the house and made us really stop and ponder where we were and remind us where we were. The difference between December and January is that the road that we took between Rafah and the hospital we stayed in a place called Deir al-Balah, which houses the Shuhada al-Aqsa or the Al-Aqsa Hospital, is that road was pretty quiet at that time. People were concentrated in the main urban areas, Rafah, Deir al-Balah, and so on. But now in April, it was full of tents. The whole route was full of tents, and that drive suddenly took 3 or 4 times an hour and a half to get 15 kilometers through the tents and the people living there. The sense of horrendousness of what we saw was really also it was exemplified in the hospital grounds. The hospital grounds were very packed, lots of tents, people living there because they thought it was safer. We know they weren't that much safer. And what we saw in the hospitals itself, we can talk about, you can write books about those really. I mean, I took a book called I Am Pilgrim with me to Gaza, It's about this big, and it's about 900 pages. And I can tell you can write 2 of those about just those 4 weeks in Gaza. What it's currently like now is what I get from many colleagues and also people that I met when I was in Gaza, and some of them are relatives of patients of mine that I met. And just as an example, Safa is the aunt of a patient that I operated on who sadly died a week after I left from her injuries. And she texted me a few days ago in the middle of the night to say, I don't know what to tell you. I've just had bullets coming past my head in the tent that we're staying in. So she's staying in Mawasi near the coast, and they had to leave their home on the eastern side of Khan Yunis. And the sense of desperation you get it's horrendous for them, and I don't know what to say, because there is no response you have when someone sends you a message like that, which you wake up to. So there's the sense is awful, and I say that the sense of guilt, I think that not just I have, but also many of my colleagues who have come back from Gaza have, it perpetuates itself by virtue of what we're seeing. And I would say being in Gaza on the inside was, I'd say, was easier than being on the outside watching it, because at least there you felt that there is something that you can do to contribute, to try and at least feel the pain that they're feeling.
Thank you. Yeah, you always think that we're protected because we're seeing everything through a screen and we're not in the midst of everything. But yeah, it's interesting that when you're there, you feel you can actually do something, while when we're seeing on a screen, we can't. But also, one of the most striking descriptions, which really shocked me as well, was I spoke to some aid workers who had come back from Gaza a few months ago, and they said that as soon as we crossed the Rafah border, the Rafah crossing, the stench of blood and the stench of sewage just hit you in the face and just stayed with you. And they said we couldn't sleep the entire time we were there, because in the nighttime you could just hear the bombings. And then even when they came back, they said, I just couldn't sleep for a week. So, it is really, really horrendous situation there. But Yumna, turning to you, as journalists, we are taught in journalism school to have, we have code of conduct, we have journalistic ethics and editorial standards. Can you just describe to the audience that, what is expected as a journalist reporting on a conflict like this? And also, you spent 10 years in Gaza reporting there. How has your reporting changed since October the 7th?
Well, as a reporter or a journalist in general, whether you're writing, you're broadcasting, you're a digital reporter, you are required most and for all to inform the people around the world of the reality on the ground of where you are. This is your responsibility. Journalism must be independent, it must be honest, and it must not be based or directly connected to any kind of agendas. It must not be politicized. Journalism has been known worldwide that it's a fourth authority because of the power of journalism, the power of a pen of a journalist, the power of the word of a journalist. And this is what a journalist should be doing. They should be practicing their journalism based on only these facts, only these ethics of journalism. So I don't think that as an independent journalist, Yumna El-Sayed, you're going to see my reporting through the past 10 years. It hasn't changed. And I'm not saying that there are no journalists who are not biased. Yes, there is. But it's not just the Palestinian journalists, because unfortunately, we were struck and we were shocked by the reality of how much international journalists are completely biased to one narrative, and that's the Israeli narrative, despite all the evidence and the facts that they can see for their own eyes. So yes, this is a fact. You can't call Palestinian journalists, for example, that they are affiliated with Hamas just for the fact that they are telling you about how much devastation, destruction, killing, looting, stealing there is around them, how much killing of civilians there is. All these numbers of children and women that have been slaughtered from day one. These are realities on the ground. They are facts. We are not making up these numbers, which means that there is something wrong that is happening. There is a huge responsibility on journalists when reporting this genocide. It's been 10 months now, and we're speaking about a genocide that has been unprecedented since World War II. Human catastrophes in every single definition, starvation of population that has never happened before since World War II. The amount of injuries and the kind of injuries that we reported about from doctors themselves, Palestinian doctors that spoke about these injuries. And then we have had international delegations of different nationalities of doctors, like what Dr. Dawas had seen in Gaza as he went in December and he went in April. How many media coverage was actually, or these doctors were exposed to? Very little, very limited. When they are international doctors, delegations of these countries into the Gaza Strip, international journalists were not able to enter. But at the end, when an international journalist enters Gaza or any other place in the world, he is dependent on local people from that place. So even after this genocide ends, when an international journalist enters the Gaza Strip, they will enter dependent on a Palestinian fixer, a Palestinian translator, speak to Palestinian officials and local residents, and then put a story together. I know they will be shocked by the amount of devastation, destruction that they will see. But what do we see in our mainstream medias around the world? This is the responsibility of journalism, to inform the people, the audience of the world. How I see it is that there was a neglectance, complete neglectance. Journalism was completely turned to certain agendas. It was biased so many times to the Israeli narrative. So many terms, definitions, words were completely changed to describe an event or an incident in a certain way that is completely opposite to the truth and to the fact. When as simple as possible, you can call it what it is. You can call it an Israeli strike on a residential home, killing Palestinian civilians. Most of them are children. It is not difficult. This is the reality of it. It should be reported this way. You are not going to see that in mainstream media. You are not going to be seeing it reported like that. On the other hand, you will find that international mainstream media has reported on claims and allegations on the 7th of October without one evidence or one fact, without one picture, without one footage, without one video. All these allegations and claims were debunked later by other Western journalists that actually investigated those claims, those allegations. And that is what journalism is: to investigate, to look for facts, to look for realities, to look for evidence, and to present them to the people. I'm not here to talk about what I think or what I believe in. I'm here to report what is happening. On the 7th of October, on the beginning of this war, my reporting was about the incidents and all the events that unfolded on the 7th of October, how they unfolded from 6 a.m. when barrages of rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israeli towns. This is how it went. If you have been unbiased from the beginning and have been going with complete integrity and complete honesty, because you know that that audience that is watching you has put their trust in what you are saying, then you can't come later on because you don't like the narrative, you don't like the realities of the atrocities that are being committed on a daily basis by the Israeli army, by the Israeli government in the Gaza Strip, and against civilian and armed civilian populations and children. And just because you are not able to speak with honesty and complete integrity about these facts and these realities, you start making up excuses of either changing the narratives, changing the language that is used, changing the definitions, or saying that, starting to point out accusations that a Palestinian narrative wouldn't be 100% credible, or everything that is being posted is through officials or Palestinian officials. The Lancet, which is a British magazine or medical magazine, when it said that over 100, or it's estimated 186,000 people killed in Gaza, and you look at the numbers that were published by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, I will tell you where that huge difference has come out from. Every time I went to the hospitals and I asked doctors, and Dr. Dawaz can clarify this as well, because I'm sure he has seen it, they would be a huge number of casualties between killed and injured. And so many of those that are killed are either human parts that are unidentified, or people that their families did not come to identify them, or nobody came to identify who they are, and people did not know who they are, the doctors did not know who they are, so they kept them as unidentified. They did not count them of those that were killed. So if from one strike 10 people are killed and they were only able to identify 5 or 6, that is the number that they're going to talk about. And the rest they will not mention until they are identified. And that's why you will find names of every single person that was killed. It's an evidence, it's a fact, it's a reality that must be respected the way it is, despite all agendas, despite all other narratives. Journalism must be independent. It must focus on what it was designed for from the beginning. Otherwise, this entire world will fall into chaos. It will not trust any kind of journalism, and that will be a really catastrophe, a really huge catastrophe, because this is the way, through journalism, we keep this world as a small village where we are informed about everything that happens everywhere, and we as civilians or populations are allowed then to act or react based on this reporting or this actions that we have seen and heard.
Thank you, Yumna. Yumna, it's unimaginable, for us what is going on there, and there's no one better than you who has been there, lived and breathed, Gaza, and has seen and witnessed and reported on it. And of course, more than 100 journalists have been killed in the conflict as well. So journalists are putting their lives in danger. Israel is not letting journalists, international journalists, come into Gaza, even though it's vital that journalists have that access so that they can independently verify and fact check from the ground. Shuruk, if I can just turn to you, you're the director of Palestine Journalism Hub. Can you just describe what it is, why you needed to set it up, and also can you speak a bit more about what the situation is like on the ground, especially for journalists, and what the constraints are, what the difficulties are in reporting from Gaza?
Thank you, and thank you for everyone, and thank you, Yumna, Omnia, because I think you are one of the local journalists that you were all inside Gaza, our source of information, and you're our eyes and you are our senses, and it really made me feel very angry to see you and see my colleagues and see us all as journalists try always to defend them ourselves, that we are journalists and we are doing our job, while seeing the international and foreign press being spokespeople to Israeli army without any ethical journalism or investigation, and dehumanizing doctors and journalists and children and families, makes me really feel more and more with injustice, actually. I don't want to speak a lot about Palestine Journalism Hub because it's something that I like to speak about more the journalists, but quickly, it's something that I've been in journalism since 30 years. And I felt that I really need to, as much as I can, to work with a new generation of journalists, freelancers in Gaza, in West Bank, in Jerusalem, and inside the 48. So I established this only 2-3 months before the war. I worked a lot in emergency help for our colleagues in Gaza, especially. They needed everything. And I think you know, because all of them, nearly 1,500 are displaced. We have only 100 remained in Gaza City and North Gaza. And some are displaced for 8th or 9th time. So, and I really built so many connections with so many good journalists and institutions. So I'm really working in emergency need and help for my colleagues. Also, I really feel that we have to be stronger community because we deserve this and we can empower each other. And also, I'm working on investigation reports, especially now about prisoners, journalists in prison, because Israel arrested since the 7th of October 100 journalists, mainly from West Bank then, but there's also tens of them from inside Gaza. They are treated really with interrogation. They are treated brutally. They are kidnapped, as we see in the Journalism Hub and so many human organizations. They are beaten. They are not addressed to court. They have no even file why they are arrested, but the lawyers say that they are arrested due to, of course, violation of freedom of speech. It's only because what they wrote and what they reported. And they are all in administrative detention. This is a law that I have to speak about since I'm addressing a panel in Britain, because this is an emergency law that was inherited. Israel inherited this from the British mandate on Palestine. And it gives the authority to Israel to invade homes, arrest whoever they want, without saying why, without addressing them to court, without making us visit them or any lawyer visit them, and without even saying when this arrest will end. There are rape inside the Israeli jails. There are interrogation. They are beating them. They are humiliating them. They are not getting any food, barely. And I've seen a colleague a month ago. He was only there in prison for 2 months. He lost 20 kilos and he was traumatized and terrified. And he even refused to do any interview with me, as much as he was really afraid. And there's this prison that Israel made, especially for Palestinians who are arrested inside Gaza. It's in Naqab. They say it's more unhuman and bad than more than Guantanamo. And we're hearing lots of testimonies from the lawyers who can visit or from others who are out. And I lost one of my family in Gaza. He was only 20 years old. He was taken from Rafah, and he died from interrogation. And nobody is really putting Israel under responsibility or punishment. Why is this happening? So the hub is to really, just to close the thing of hub, it's just to, as much as I can, putting my experience and my generation experience with the new generation, trying even to think of how later on in Gaza we can help our colleagues to stand up and to really gain confidence again in their career and to work and produce and rebuild this journalism scene that Israel really wanted to demolish. You know, Israel also bombed 88 media offices in Gaza during the war. One was for AFP and one for Reuters. We lost till now 152 of our colleagues. 20 of them are our female colleagues, journalists. This is according to the Palestinian Syndicate. Other numbers say they are even 160. They lack everything. I call them every day. I call my colleagues to check, and sometimes I don't really receive any answer because internet is very bad. And even if they want to upload their videos, their work, they have to go to a very far area, very dangerous for them. They even try to find water. There's really bad starvation, especially in the north and Gaza City. No fuel, no electricity.
Shuruk,
But again,
if I can just stop you there and just take a pause. We've got quite a bit to get through as well. I just want to give some other panelists some time as well. But our thoughts and prayers are with you definitely. For the difficult situation, circumstances that you're both going through. But I did want to turn to just a YouGov survey that was commissioned for the event that's happening here, the Jalsa Salana, the annual convention of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And one of the questions that was asked in that was, it was asked to the general British public, and it was that, do you think UK media coverage of the Gaza war and the Ukraine war was fair? And when they were asked about the Gaza war, only 33% of the British public thought that British media coverage of the Gaza war was fair, so just a third. And about double that thought that the media coverage of the Ukraine war was fair, right? So what that reveals is that there's a big disparity there, and the general public in the UK doesn't trust media narratives when it comes to Gaza as compared to when it comes to Ukraine. Dr. Khalid, does that surprise you?
I think that point, the issue about this survey, I think demonstrates 2 points in my mind. One is about the credibility of the information coming out, but also about how it compares to other sources. I think what's obvious, and I don't mean in any way to compare the suffering of those in Ukraine to those in Gaza. I mean, when individuals suffer in their individual ways, and they're just as valid. But the point is, I think, is that what we're seeing in Gaza, we see the mainstream media, but we see what's happening on social media. It's very different. And we see the voices, we hear the voices, we know what's going on, and you can choose to close your eyes and turn away if you wish to, because that makes you feel better about yourself. But actually, it's out there for you to see, and therefore it becomes very difficult for somebody with a humanist view to look at what's seeing in Gaza as we are bombarded by the videos that are coming out, and to say that what we're seeing on the mainstream media is accurate and credible. And I think that's for me is the main problem. And therefore, yes, I'm not surprised that that's the case. I think in the case of Ukraine, I think what we're seeing and the figures are coming out and so on, they seem credible because there isn't an alternative story that we see which challenges that. And of course, that comes down to what we've been told we can only do, which is we are not allowed to watch the Russian media anyway. But there isn't an alternative story coming out from there which challenges certainly the human cost of what's happening in Ukraine.
And also the way a lot of media outlets sometimes change the headlines, or the way they downplay, certain aggressions, or the way they, change it to assign blame away from who's actually done it. For example, like just a few days ago, there was a BBC article that Gaza man with Down syndrome dies a lonely death. And then the tweet had so many, thousands of comments saying that they missed, the actual crux of the story. Normally, journalistically, the principle is that you put the actual crux of the story at the top, right? You don't hide it. You don't hide the lead. You don't bury the lead, it's called, right? And what they did is they just made...
The title should explain the whole event in that title. Once you read the title, you know who is or what this whole story is speaking about. And in such a story, I'm sorry to cut you, but this is one of the most devastating humanitarian stories that you can not possibly just cross. And I can't understand, I can't find a justification that such a title would be given to such an atrocity. This is an atrocity. It's an atrocity against humanity, against human rights, against human law. It is combined by so many crimes in one crime, and you just fail to report about it with honesty the way it is.
Absolutely. And, you know, they did change the headline in the end after a lot of pressure to show that, you know, what actually happened was the IDF soldiers came and they had dogs which actually mauled, actually attacked the man. And then he was locked in a room, and that's how he sadly died. But let me just turn to the audience. We had some interest from a couple of audience members who wanted to say a few words. And if we can just keep it to 1-2 minutes, because we're running short of time, and I do want to open it up to the rest of the audience as well. Rabbi Mandelbaum, if you just want to, you know, speak a bit about your thoughts on this.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. You might all wonder, what does a rabbi do here? I'm here to listen. And I want to give you all a very simple rule, especially those who fall prey to narratives or political agendas. How can we look at the picture with protecting ourselves to not fall prey to any biased political agenda? So I thought about it a long time, and I came to a very simple solution. Leave out the word but. Never use the word but. You hear something, you witness something, you see, which is reported. Don't think, yeah, but. There starts the problem. Because with the word but, we block our emotions. We block our empathy with every human being. Leave out the word but. That would be my wish. And I try to do it as best as I can. And finally, I just want to give a word of encouragement to the doctor, to Yunha, to, what's her name? Shuruk. The work of the journalists is a very holy work. They are like the watchmen, watchwomen of what's going on. And they bring us the news, and they put all their energy. Sometimes they risk their lives. So it's a very holy work. And you must be very brave. And you will be challenged, but don't give up and go through it. You shall be blessed.
Thank you, Rabbi, for those profound words. And Leah Levain, if you can take the mic, just if you have a minute or so.
So you've got two Jewish speakers now. So my name's Leah Levain. I'm from Jewish Voice for Labour. And we were set up to try to address the false allegations or exaggerations of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And what I wanted to say, why I think this is so important, is the framing is being followed by journalists, but it's being set from the top. We can talk about the double standards. So Keir Starmer, for example, issued a very quick, heartfelt statement about the very awful bombing of a children's hospital in the Ukraine. I have not yet heard a sympathetic statement about any of the atrocities carried out in Gaza. And that allows the journalists, in fact, the journalists are probably only allowed to be journalists in the mainstream media if they accept that broad framing. And I know I don't have long, and I won't take long, and I'm sure this will come up at other points during your very impressive weekend. But one of my concerns is how this framing, certainly the framing of the journalists that everything started on October the 7th as if everything was hunky-dory before then. I think most of us know that's very, very far from the case, not least a siege of Gaza that's been going on, is it 15 or 16 years now? But the way in which the framing, that the people who, for example, supported the independence, and specifically the attacks on the Muslim Vote, which is an organization to encourage Muslims to be involved in politics, and the death threats and the threats to mosques and so on, this hysteria because of an alternative narrative, the truth is getting out there. So this idea of vilifying the marches in support of the minimal demand of a ceasefire as hate marches. Anyway, I could go on, but I know I shouldn't because this is your time. But thank you for letting me speak and inviting me. And there are many Jewish people throughout the world who are absolutely with the people of Gaza and doing all we can and want to be with you too. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and thank you
Can
for...
I say something quickly concerning
Please.
the Jewish voices that our colleagues were saying? It's really, it has never been a religious battle. It has never been a religious case. It's for us Palestinians, it's the issue of Zionism, the issue of occupation. This is really our issue. So it's not an issue of Christianity or Islam or Jewish people, except it's just the labeling of Muslims as if this war, as if it's between civilized white Christian West and the uncivilized, between brackets, Muslims and Arabs and colored. So I just want to thank you, Yani, for this, the rabbi and the colleague who just talked before, but just I want to explain that it's not a religious thing for us. It's something that has to do with occupation. Absolutely. And with all the genocide that is going. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, you know, there's so much we can talk about this topic. There's so many kind of facets to this. But just going back to the media element, you know, I worked in the BBC for a good 5 years or so. And just to give everyone a bit of hope, you know, we can criticize the media all day long. But, you know, in newsrooms, often there's always debate and discussion happening between journalists. Right, and I remember that once there was kind of a meeting between like the editorial directors and the head of the editorial policy department, and somebody asked about the Israel-Palestine conflict and the way the BBC covers it, and the director of editorial policy, he said that, you know, yes, we get pressure, and sometimes, you know, the editor on the day, he might be pressured to change a headline or something, but the Israeli government, they asked the BBC, they said that you should change your wording from occupied territories to disputed territories, right? And the BBC actually held its ground, and they said, no, we're not going to change that because occupied territories is, by international law, it's occupied, right? So we're going to stand our ground. So there are times when the media does do a good job as well and stand its ground, but of course, look, you've got pressures coming from all sides, and often the media gets blasted whatever it does, right? I remember, again, at BBC, right, if your coverage is slanted towards Israel, the journalists will get criticized for being pro-Israel or anti-Palestine. If your coverage is slanted towards Palestinians, or Palestine, then you'll get criticized for being anti-Israel and pro-Palestine. And then if you sit on the fence and you don't criticize any, and you try to be in the middle, then you'll get criticized as well for kind of being spineless and for not taking a side. So I'll just ask one more question, then we go to audience questions quickly. Yumna, you know, on the back of this, what I've just said, is there a responsibility for the media to be completely balanced, or are there times when it should take a stance? Because, you know, as journalists, we're supposed to challenge, you know, hold power to account, challenge authority, and also be a voice for the voiceless. So do we always have to be balanced and impartial, or are there times when you can kind of take a side, or you should take a side? Just very briefly, if you may.
I think, and I deeply believe that the journalism's role everywhere in the world, as long as it is journalism, true journalism, then it must be completely honest, it must be objective, it must be impartial. The case itself has the justice to present itself. How I see it as Yumna, the Palestinian issue, the entire Palestinian cause, it has enough justice to present itself since 1948 until today. For 70 years, if you look at it, history, year by year, it has all the justice to present itself with all evidence and facts. But that does not change the fact that what journalism or how journalism should be practiced is what it was designed for, what it was created for. Journalism has been created to inform the world, to inform the public, the people of the world. And as much as the people put their trust in your reporting, in your journalism, then you must be really in respect and appreciation for that trust. And you should do your best as a journalist and as a journalism organization to continue with that trust. But you can't expect the people to see something that is completely different than what you are reporting from your newsrooms, and that is completely different than the reality, or very shallow, or you choose to leave a lot out and just focus on something else, or change the tone according to the narrative, and then expect your audience to believe you. And you can't continue to call yourself a journalist and to call yourself a journalism organization when you have neglected and abandoned those ethics, the ethics of true journalism, the integrity of journalism. And under integrity lies a lot that journalists must think about and act upon. What this integrity of journalism means, if every journalist is going to act towards that journalism that they practice with integrity, we will see a whole new difference, or a whole new generation of difference in journalism than what we have been witnessing in these past 10 months.
Thank you, Yamina. There's a lot to reflect for the media industry about how it's reported on the war in Gaza, and also, you know, what it can do going forward in the future. I just want to open it up to the audience now. We've got about 5-10 minutes, about 7-8 minutes really. There's a hand at the back. You can direct your question to an individual panelist, or just open it up for any of our panelists.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Ali Wasim. I have a PhD in management, but my specialization in undergraduate is in economics and politics. I've been a researcher for the last 10-12 years, so I've looked at conflicts and sort of for my own personal interest. And something special about Palestine touches my heart, that you can't really place it as an economic war where you see, for example, in Afghanistan or Iraq. And it seems like an oppressive regime, and I think you touched on that. That's not a religious war. So it does pain us, but my question is that if it's not a religious war per se, and I can't place it in an economic perspective either, what do you think it is? Is it an oppressive regime? Because my fear is we see oppressive regimes like Pakistan and others, and things that you've mentioned, picking people up, putting them away without anything, any laws or things like that. That's something that we're heading towards as well in our country. How do we address it then? How do we place it? How do we frame it like it was mentioned earlier? What do you think is the way around it? And like you've said yourself, with media and other things, the powerful dictate, and you said that rightly within the BBC as well, we see that. They're going to report what the powerful want it to report, and history is written by those in power. And we see that in the subcontinent, we see it across the world. So what's the way around it? How do we go around it? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. If we can just keep it on the topic about the media's reporting on Gaza, because of course there's much more to delve into and discuss, but I think we don't have time for that. But if Shuruk, if you can just take 1 minute just to...
Quickly, I will answer that. Yes, it's not a religious war, because Israel just got benefit of the religious story to give legitimacy for its occupation and taking the whole of our country, which is Palestine, to remove us as if we don't exist, and do what they call Israel now under it's called, read about industrialization of Holocaust. You can maybe understand more what I say. It's not, Israel wants it to be religious because they want to say that this is what God promised for the Jewish people. But it's not religious because it's totally occupation, taking other people's land and saying that they came to Palestine and they found nobody. We did not exist for them. Till now, Israel does as if we don't exist. So we have to dig more into this, but it's not just religious. If it's religious, why they are why they are getting in Ramallah, and why they are getting into and even taking homes in Galilee or even Bethlehem. Or it's not just, they just got over the religious story.
Yeah, I
In
think.
my opinion.
I
But
think
it's colonization, it's occupation. This is what it is, actually, in my opinion.
I think we'd have to do a whole new.
I just want to say a very small thing
Very quickly,
about
please.
that, just to confirm also what Shuruk was saying. It's very simple. The entire story is very simple. If you put it under the title illegal occupation and lawful occupation, you have three main titles coming out from that. You have land confiscation, you have slaughtering of civilians, and you have the I'm sorry, it was, I had that in my head, but the main, exactly,
they're erasing total people, and just putting as if there's as if we don't exist, and if we exist, we have to be erased. Yes. And this is what's happening. And maybe it will happen soon in West Bank.
I'll come back to you. You'll have more time to speak, but this is a whole new panel discussion that we'd have to organize to delve into that. But I just do want to give it back to the audience. I want to fit in one or two more questions. We've got very short of time. If you, and then after maybe one or two more questions, I'll give it back to the panelists for just 1 more minute of reflection, and then we can end it there.
Assalamu alaikum. This is to the doctor on the stage. Sorry, I forgot your name. Since you've returned from Gaza, you would think that all the mainstream media companies, they would want to snap you up to hear your story because you've been there, you've lived it. Have any British or American media outlets contacted you to say, tell us exactly what you've seen with your own eyes to get the truth? Have they asked you to write an article? Yes, thank you.
Yes, I've had contact, like as with my other colleagues, we've had contact from a multitude of organizations. I've got an article in a Daily Telegraph, which is very interesting for me because it gets an audience which normally a lot of us who sit on this side of the fence don't have access to. And this is, they documented a diary that I wrote for the period I was in Gaza in April, and I think that's got a lot of traction and attention. What I've also noticed is that, for example, when earlier on, after January, but also after April, when we were asked to go and talk to the media organizations in the UK, and I talk about the ITV and BBC and colleagues of mine being on CNN and so on, is that there's always some, you can sense the tension a little bit in the editorial room. So as an example, in the BBC, when I went, I was told that the editor for this particular program would like to keep this news story alive, but the editor from the next session doesn't. So therefore, we'd like you to come now because we'd like to keep this alive. And then, we were given 3 or 4 minutes on live. So there is tension, and I think I recognize within the media organizations, like the rest of us, there's pull from either side. And I also recognize we are human beings. We are always going to be biased. There's no such thing as unbiased reporting because we all have our inherent biases. But it then comes down to which power, to kind of inverted commas, has the dominant voice, is able to yield enough influence to make their voice louder. And at the moment, I don't think we're winning that one. And I think, just very briefly on the issue of whether we think that there's such a thing as having to be unbiased and impartial in your reporting. Well, yes, you can be impartial, but like you was saying, one's got to mention the facts, and I think it's up to people to decide whether really impartiality comes into this. It is reporting of facts.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. I'll just take very last question, one more.
Assalamu alaikum. I am from Germany, and there's a similar thing going on as in UK. The Prime Minister declared its unconditional solidarity with Israel, and we tried a lot of things. We had a campaign in our Muslim community writing letters to politicians and to fight for a ceasefire. And the other point is also that they are also on daily basis there are activists and protesting pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, but still the German government is not willing to change their mind. They are still supporting Israel. And what else we can do that this finally changes? Because we don't know what else to do. We tried our best. And this is my question to you.
Shuruk, do you want to answer that? What else can the general public do to change
I
the
think
narrative?
the genuine people who really stand for human rights and for Palestine and what's going on, they are finding ways, either by going to the streets, either by delivering the story, either by trying to push their government and the decision makers. And I think this is what we can do all as a community who are really sharing human rights and international law. At the end, those governments decided it's a decision for them not to stand against genocide. And in my opinion, any person who doesn't make any step either by words or by even trying to do anything, because otherwise you will be, in my opinion, partner in the genocide. This is what so many countries are, backing with military aid, backing with money, even refusing to be part of the accountability of Israel, while they lectured us for years about human rights and international law. So I think you are doing fine. Being here, listening to what's happening, not labeling Palestinians, not dehumanizing Palestinians, keeping your humanity alive. I think this is one of the most important things we can all do, because I think it's not only attack on Palestinians, children and women and doctors and families, it's also attack on humanity and that we share. So I think I cannot say more with that. You can do that. We all have to raise voices in different ways. Everybody can find his or her way to really pressure the governments, I think, in this.
Thank you, Shuruk. And those were very, good, profound, and final remarks from you. If I can just take Yumna and just any final, take a minute for any final thoughts, any final remarks.
I just want to go back to the title that I was saying at first, that this whole conflict, it's not a conflict. It's a wrong word to say that it's a conflict, really. But I'm going to use that word because it's the worldwide known term for the issue between Israel and Palestine. But really, the correct definition for it is that it is an unlawful occupation, illegal occupation that systematically imposes the land confiscation, civilian slaughter and termination, and the forced displacement of Palestinian people. And during this genocide, 10 months of genocide, all three were practiced systematically under the ongoing claims and allegations of self-defense against the Hamas or Palestinian fighters that has gone on for 9 or 10 months of genocide, unlawful, illegal genocide, where every Palestinian person in the Gaza Strip, whether a paramedic, whether a defense team, whether a teacher, a professor, an armed civilian, children, women, everyone, journalists, everyone was a legitimate target to the Israeli army from day one. The responsibility that the media, international media especially, has to have acted accordingly from day one towards this genocide that has been unfolding day after day, worse than the day before, has been a huge responsibility that was not taken in account to the amount of atrocities that were committed every day. When we witnessed the bombing of all media offices from week one, and there is a huge worldwide silence about it. It's not even mentioned. It's not even shouted out. It is not even condemned when there is a forced displacement of over 1 million people from the north and Gaza City towards the south, when international organizations speak out and say that this is a catastrophic, tragic situation that will cause more and more catastrophes towards the civilians themselves. And that is not taken in account. It's not highlighted. It's not outspoken about by the international media. That is complicity in the genocide. When we had to spend the first 7 months between, as Palestinian journalists, between being killed, being injured, being threatened, our families being killed, being displaced from place to another, and living all these hardships and challenges every single day, after 7 months was when the world in other international countries started hearing out our voices through social media platforms that also attacked us fiercely, brutally, censored our accounts, censored our voices, shadow banned our accounts. And it has been ongoing since then, since day one. It took us several months to reach the international audience of these Western countries, when an international journalist in these countries could have shown the entire world, shown the entire population of their country at least, what is happening in the other part of the world that is called, that is Gaza Strip, and the atrocities that are being committed against the civilian population. This genocide wouldn't have remained for 10 months, and it's still ongoing until today.
Yumna, we can't imagine, what it's like there and what you're going through. And of course, our thoughts, our prayers are with you and your families. And, we hope and pray that things get better there. It is a shame that a lot of the world media, the politicians maybe didn't do enough to try to stop what's happening there. I just want to give the final remarks very, very briefly to Dr. Khalid Dawas. He went on a mission, 1 minute max. I'll just also say that he's from Medical Aid for Palestinians. He went on a mission with MAP, and there are 2 people here from MAP, and they'll be setting up a stall after this discussion, so please do go visit the stall and give them your support. But we'll just wrap it up, and I'll give the final words.
I'll be very brief. Because the mainstream media editorial offices have chosen to ignore the streams and the reams of social media and videos that we all see, I do feel like my visit to Gaza has meant that I want to be the voice of those who have become voiceless, and they really have been. The main complaint I remember hearing very early on in January was we have been abandoned. Nobody's listening to us. Of course, we know that's not true because we do listen to them, but the outcome is effectively zero. And your question about what's happening in Germany, I think, baffles many of us. We understand why it's happening, but it still is beyond understanding in many ways. I think that there is a tipping point. We need to persevere. We need to understand that the Israeli war machine works on the assumption that we will all give up. We don't know what's happening behind the scenes, what's happening in their discussions in their offices behind closed doors. I know for a fact they must be thinking, we've got to make sure they give up. That is part of the war machine. And for us to give up falls into that narrative. So we must not give up. We must keep talking about it. And eventually there is a tipping point if we persevere. We've got to persevere more than that war machine does.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. And I think that's a very apt way to end it. We can never give up. We can always continue to strive and to try to make things better. Yumna, Shuruk, and Dr. Khalid Dawas, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, to all of you who have watched us on the live stream and joined us in person, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.